Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Skwawk Talk on Socialist Telly. And I'm delighted to welcome a bumper panel of stellar guests this evening who are all members of the left slate in the Unison General Secretary election. Unison National Executive election. I'll go in no particular order there, but we have Lily Boulby, who is standing for election as the youth representative on the NEC, Kath Owen, Liz Brennan, Libby Nolan, and Paul Holmes. And last but not least, Damo from Socialist Telly is also joining us. Unison has recently elected another right-wing General Secretary, and she has, as I mentioned in the promotional video earlier on, opted on at least a couple of occasions, the only two that I've seen, and I believe one of them was her first one, to use media appearances not to talk about, issues such as the jobs crisis, etc., at least that I heard, but to attack other union leaders, which was an interesting choice. And there's a temptation, having seen, the past decade or so of right-wing leadership in Unison, for left-wingers to perhaps write the union off and think, well, that's that then for the next 4 or 5 years while we have another right-winger in charge. But the people we'll talk to tonight, I believe, will tell you differently. The power of a left-wing, a left-dominated national executive in the union could be substantial. And I'm going to invite the guys to tell us about what they think that they can achieve if they and their colleagues on the left slate manage to get themselves elected onto the Unison National Executive. So let me bring in Paul. You stood to be General Secretary and would have won that if you'd been the only left candidate. What does the Unison NEC do, and why is it important this election? And obviously, all the others on the panel are welcome to jump in as and when and make it a lively discussion. And we'll also, just to let people know, be fielding questions and comments via social media from those who are watching, so you can chip in there on the YouTube and Facebook channels. Twitter hasn't fully finalized its new platform yet after it ended Periscope. So Paul, what does the Unison NEC do, and why is it important?
Well, when I stood in the General Secretary election, I got the highest vote anybody's ever got who came second or who wasn't an employee of the union. Got 33.7% of the vote. And the reason the union's important is it's the biggest union in Britain. It doesn't act like the biggest union, doesn't talk like the biggest union, but it's got 1.3 million members. And them members are in the vital services that everybody's looked at in the last 12 months. The voluntary sector, care homes, hospitals, local government. Absolutely priority areas in delivering services. And what the National Executive of Unison does, basically, the Parliament of Unison is the national conference that takes place once a year, which is obviously restricted this year to 1 day because of COVID. But on the 51 weeks in between conference, then it's run by the National Executive Council. The rule book's really clear that it's run by the lay membership of the union. And for us, we've got to start acting like the biggest union. We haven't appeared on Question Time for 20 years. Nobody from our union, when you think what this union's been through in the last 20 years, with tendering, outsourcing, austerity, the whole political agenda of the last 20 years, we haven't appeared on Question Time, and we've been asked on numerous occasions. So for us, these union elections are essential, because the union's got to change. It can't carry on business as usual when everybody knows that the employers have a motto, which they won't say it on the telly, but they say it to each other, which is don't waste a good crisis. And that's what they're not going to do when the COVID comes under control. They're not going to waste it. We've all seen a foretaste of that over the last 12 months. And, particularly young people and people on decent terms and conditions, decent pensions, going to come to the forefront in the attacks. And that's why these elections are important. A, for the terms, conditions and futures of our members, but B, for the terms, conditions and futures of the people who use the services and the people who will go to work in them services over the next period. That's why it's vital. It's not a personality conflict. you know, I am, and people in this room will have heard me say this to the National Executive, fed up of hearing of our brothers and sister unions being referred to as competitors. We're not in business and they're not competitors. They're brothers and sisters wanting to achieve the same things that we want to achieve. And that's why this union election is so important.
Very good. Any of the rest of the panel want to comment on that topic?
I'd like to come in just. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, let's get Libby first, and then.
I was going to just jump in really quickly, because one of the things I think is really important that people know is that the NEC, I sit on the SGE, the Health SGE, and when I first got elected to it, people said, "Oh, you're going to be there till you retire." Now, I think we need to shake that up. It needs to be that the members understand that, you know, they can go for these seats. You know, these seats need to be the voice of the people that we're representing on the shop floors, wherever those shop floors are. And we can't do that if people are sitting in those seats year after year after year after year with the same ideas, comfortable in the fact that they're part of that, but not making any great changes. So I'm really passionate that whatever the membership want, that I will take there, and that the people here will take there. And part of that are the things we're going to hear about tonight, which will be pay is a big one, and conditions. I just wanted to jump in on that. So sorry for jumping in before others. Thank you.
Who was that wanting to come in next? Was that Kath?
Hi, it's Kath here. I represent higher education members on the NEC and have done for 4 years now. And I think Paul's right when he talks about you know, the service users and the public, and you know, the members out there. There's also something around how our branches are organised. And this union's not seen any real change in 20 years, and we want to make real change in the union. And in that time, we've gone from having very large-scale employers, and the face of the public sector's changed. We've got so many people who are contracted out, branches of our union having to deal with multiple employers and contracted out agencies, and that isn't always reflected how those branches are supported. And so sometimes it can be quite frustrating for people on the ground to be expected to just recruit and service members, when actually it's the branches that need change, branches that need support to face the realities of what, you know, working in the public sector is like in 2021. So I think that's something, it's kind of getting a bit like nerdy into the union, but anyone who's been a branch secretary or even an activist in their own branch will have seen some of that. And I think that's something that we're wanting to bring because it's something that needs to change.
It's possibly an interesting concept if I've understood what you said, Libby, and touched on, I think, Kath as well, that you know, for people who might be members of a union but are not that involved necessarily in the kind of ongoing, you know, processes and elections and, you know, branch life, etc. The idea that in a union, Steve, which is there. Go ahead, mate.
30 years ago, when I became the branch secretary, taking up Kath's point, we had 4 employers in our branch, and 95% of the membership worked for one of them. We've 403 employers in our branch now. That's how the whole ethos of national negotiations, national conditions has gone out of the window with privatisation, outsourcing, devolution, etc. Yet the union's finance structures are still based on the model of 27 years ago. 23% of the funds go to the branches. That's nowhere near enough for the workload. The branches are doing 90% of the work. They're absolutely going under. If you spoke to a branch secretary in the health service, I'm not in the health service, I'm in local government, but the last 12 months would have been hell. But the funding for them branches is exactly the same as it was 25 years ago when there were national terms and conditions everywhere.
Yes. I mean, it's an interesting concept to me, you know, and I mean, I'm steeped in union stuff, or, you know, on a daily basis, but it's still an interesting concept to me that that working class and working people might be underrepresented in the you know, in the structures of a union that is meant to represent their interests, and the whole point is to represent the labour movement. I mean, is that a genuine, practical kind of ongoing issue, or is it am I misapprehending what you said?
See, I went to bed on the 10th of January 2021, as I do most nights, but I did on the 10th of January 2020. And the following day, my salary could have increased by £100,000 a year. £100,000 a year. And I'm on 32,000. And the average wage of a Unison member is 21,000. How can we be a working class organisation representing people in public sector pay freeze and paying wages in £130,000 a year? And I think that's the key. The union is a working class organisation fighting for the terms, conditions, and pensions of its members. And those
that was one of the things that you stood on, Paul, wasn't it? To have that you would take your normal working salary for the job and not take the big pay bump, which I'm sure stood you in good stead with a lot of the members. But a
lot of the members would also be 10,000 a year below me, even when I'm on 32,000.
Yes. Liz, you've been fairly quiet so far. What do you want to say on this?
I just wanted to chip in and say, I think it really does feel like we are, we've gone through a crisis and now we are on the verge of austerity Mark 2. And we know, we should be on a war footing in the unions. We should be prepared. I think our members feel over the last year, kind of battered, worn out, overworked, etc. And we really need to be our front foot forward and be prepared to support them as much as possible. We need to step up here as much as our members have during the pandemic. And for me, I think, that's what kind of motivated me to stand to really make a change in the union and to get us prepared for, what we know is coming our way, the attacks and being made to pay for the crisis, basically.
Yes, well, you say a war footing. I mean, one of the things that we've seen emerging on an ever increasing basis throughout this pandemic really has been the use of fire and rehire as a tactic for driving down people's wages, driving down their terms, their conditions, their protections. We've seen some victories as well in the union movement against that. But it's not the order of the questions that I had written down, but let's jump to that, seeing as you mentioned being on a war footing. I mean, fire and rehire, has the union been strong enough against those kind of tactics? If not, how can that change? What can the NEC do towards it? Sorry, but
let's be clear. And I don't look backwards, I look forwards. But in the lead up till the 1926 miners' strike, their motto was not a penny off the pay, not a minute on the day. And that's what fire and rehire is. If you look at what's happened at British Gas, they're wanting to cut the wages, cut the rates of pay, and lengthen the working week. And that is what every employer is looking at. I saw the other day that 9% of employees in Britain have had the pay cut in the last 12 months, the paying conditions. And that doubles to 18% when you look at people under 25. A fifth of people under 25, those who've still got a job, 88% of redundancies are for people under 25. And fire and rehire, whether it's a British Airways, Tower Hamlets Council, Go Northwest buses, whether it's at British Gas, etc. I saw yesterday that Douay Egbert in Banbury in Oxfordshire, 300 employees, they're looking to fire and rehire. They've had 41% increase in sales of coffee because of the COVID. They've had a 9% increase in profit, and they're wanting to fire and rehire the 300 employees on lower terms and conditions and get rid of the final salary pension scheme. Everybody on this call knows that's what the employers want to do, whether it's in a university, a council, a gas, electric, energy, and they're the people who we represent. And what Big Bill Haywood said in 1921, which is when somebody gets $1 that they haven't earned, somebody who did earn it doesn't get it, is what these hedge fund companies are thinking about all the time. When the Care UK strike were on, I think it was 2014, that were the social care strike in Doncaster, the company that owned Care UK owned Fatface and they owned Pret a Manger. These companies don't know what they own, but they know they're paying too many wages out and too much terms and conditions. And they'd like the terms and conditions of McDonald's at every employer. That's what they'd like. And that's what us five are facing. That's what it's. We know what's coming in the next 12 months because we meet management. We know what they want.
I think I would say on diapers as well specifically. I read an article the other day that said, I think from Unite's membership, I think it was like 97% of members in a consultative vote were for action. And, you know, not only does that show how angry people are after, you know, everything that Paul's just touched on, everything that people have been through over the past couple of years, and not just COVID specifically, but, you know, since the 2008 crash and before that, like it's been constant pressing down on so many workers. And I think it kind of ties in so well to what Paul was saying before, like we cannot be seeing other unions as competitors if we've got in a workplace 97% of members in one union wanting to strike, and then what happens if that's not, you know, relayed in other unions there, or, you know, replicated across other services. It's kind of shows how desperately important it is for us to actually have that coordinated action, because we're not going to be able to do anything if we're not actually joined together, and we can't fight against fire and rehire if not every union and not every, you know, member in every workplace is actually properly fighting against it. So I think it is a very good case for why we need to be coordinated and not see other unions as competitors.
Libby makes a really good point because, and as Paul said, this tactic of fire and rehire, it's happening. I mean, I know loads of different universities where it's taking place. So in my own region in Yorkshire, in Scotland, in the Southwest, at various stages of this type of activity. And there's another thing that you see sometimes, which isn't just rehire, it's rehire people into a new company. And that's, you might have heard about, you know, sort of contract and agency staff in universities and colleges, and now they're just taking all the support staff and putting them into a separate company, and no surprises there about the terms and conditions, and particularly the pensions. The pensions is the one that they're really going for, because there's some still decent pension schemes in further and higher education. So I think we see the same things. It's always a slightly different each time, but Libby's right. We need to be coordinated and to be looking across the piece, not just because we're not even doing it within our own service groups sometimes. And what we should be doing is be doing it across all of the sectors and across the whole union, and then linking up with our brother and sister unions, because we're all facing the same issues ultimately, and that's something that I'd like to see as like a change within our union.
Yes.
Don't you find?
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting times that we've just gone through, and we're still in the pandemic, and I think a lot of people thought, oh, we're going to have it easy now, you know, because the managers, the bosses are gonna look after us somehow, are gonna look after us. And here we're facing hire and fire. We're facing forced redeployment for many staff. And as you say, you know, whole groups of staff have been moved in the name of COVID. You know, but there's a pandemic. We're gonna move you because there's a pandemic and lives depend on it. And it's almost that lots of people felt that they were being conscripted into a different job, and they're still there. It's a year on, and their terms and conditions are affected, and that's happened in all of the public services. And it's that kind of thing that we need to have eyes on the ground. We need to have more and more and more activists within the union, and those voices need to be heard within the service groups and within the NEC. So that we can fight it. If you've got a strong union, those bosses are not going to be thinking, oh, I'm going to try a fire and rehire here, because they'll be all out on a picket line before I can blink. And that's what we need to be sending that message. So we need to communicate that we are a joined up organisation, that we're not just one union, we're many unions. Whatever worker I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with, that's the worker that I should be standing shoulder to shoulder. I'm not interested what union they're in, and I'm not interested in anything other than, are you going to cross a picket line? So I think that's really something that we need to be bringing together, that strength of action, that strength and confidence, because at the moment the management are confident and the government's confident, but we need to turn that around, I think. And the way of doing that is the NEC.
There's a couple of people commenting here on the fact that, there are also Labour-run authorities and organisations. Truvis on Twitter saying, don't forget Labour-run LBTH used fire and rehire, and it's an ongoing dispute. Labour local authorities looking to fire and rehire too. So allotment lady saying we need a strong NEC to turn our union into a fighting one, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But I think, it's worth looking. Shamefully, Labour Party run authorities have been, have often been as bad as acting as Tory Hatchet, and essentially to inflict cuts on people. I'm thinking of the Birmingham bin strike, which was, if I remember rightly, it was Unite and Unison involved in that one, where they're some of the lowest paid workers in the council, and they were trying to do similar to them to force them out of the pay that they were on onto lower grades, etc. How will
it's not just that, Steve? It's not, the Birmingham bins dispute, the Birmingham home care dispute, the Durham teaching assistants, the Derby teaching assistants, they were all Labour authorities.
Yes.
But what links all them disputes is it was the low paid that were getting in the neck. That was the issue. Every public sector worker knows that when a manager is getting towards the end of their career, there's a cut down in the managers and a promotion for those who are getting near the end of the year to help with the pension. Everybody knows that if one manager leaves, somebody else gets some more money. Everybody knows that. That doesn't apply to low paid workers. And the fire and rehire, Oscar Wilde, when he arrived in this country, said, the first thing I noticed about England was everybody was paid in inverse proportion to the usefulness. And that's what all union officials know. They all know it. And they all know that fire and rehire is not aimed at reducing the salaries of people in the health service and local government who are earning more than £100,000 a year. It's aimed at the porters. It's aimed at the cleaners. It's aimed at the education teaching assistants. And that's who we represent. We're not Sir Galahads or Lady Galahads in this dispute. What we are is people who recognise what's coming for our members. And we're being honest with them, and they'll be honest with us. If we, a priest once said this to me in Huddersfield when we were fighting privatisation of cleaning. He said, he came on the picket line and he said to me, where else in Huddersfield can a low-paid cleaner have a decent pension scheme other than at the university, the hospital or the council? Where else will they get it? And it isn't just a matter of feather-bedded pensions for high-paid people. Loads of our members couldn't live on the state pension without the little bit of pension they get that the councils are wanting to cut.
Yeah,
that's where the fight is.
So, that kind of leads us. Actually, I'm going to move on to the next point in a second, but I just want to bring. It doesn't feel right having Demo on the screen for this long and having him sit there quietly because he's normally our gobbiest member, probably. So, Demo, will you give us your take on what you've heard so far?
That's a fair point, I suppose. I've managed 25 minutes nearly and been utterly silent. But this has been a fascinating discussion so far. I must admit, 25 minutes, we've covered an awful lot of ground in a very short space of time. And, there's some people, just going over a couple of the points that struck out to me, really. Some of the people remaining in posts that they've managed to get for life. And that sounds like it's run like a private fiefdom in a lot of ways, and perhaps the reason that the party has the union even hasn't been represented on Question Time in 20 years is perhaps they quite like it that way and don't particularly want to come under a lot of scrutiny for that. And that's bad for the movement. That's bad for representation of workers and members who may not necessarily know altogether what's going on within the union. But fire and rehire is something we're hearing an awful lot about at the moment. It's a lot of it going on around the country. And as an activist and as a trade unionist, I want to see my trade union active. And you look around on social media, for example, which is a fantastic platform now for trade unions to use to show what they're doing. And you get people like Howard Beckett or Len McCluskey, and what they're doing is being broadcast, and they're on picket lines and say, look, here I am, we're fighting with these people at Barnoldswick, for example, Fantastic result there. But to think of Unison, and I'm thinking, when was the last time I saw video clips of Unison on a picket line or something like that? And I'm struggling to find it. And we desperately need activists at the heart of the trade union movement. We need activists leading that movement, and that needs to come from the top. And to see other union leaders who are being active in that role and showing their members what they're doing and what they're about and how they're fighting for them. And then you see the newly elected General Secretary to Unison, who has essentially attacked that kind of behavior that for me personally, I want to see a trade union doing. It doesn't fill me with a huge degree of hope that things in Unison are going to change. So I'm just wondering how the panel feels about overcoming that.
Can I come in on that? I work within a hospital. I'm a nurse, and one of the things that's been amazing, I think is the only word for it, is the grassroots activism that's happening in every single hospital at the moment. And I'd say a fair degree of those activists are not unionised at all, are not political. And I have to say they've caught up really fast. And I'd be interested to know what unions they have joined. But they have been absolutely amazing on social media, fighting for the 15%, which is their cry. That's their war cry. Mostly they're all nurses. They tend to lead with where nurses are not healthcare workers or health workers. So it's often the unions that are reminding them of the masses behind them or in front of them, often on picket lines, that will be on picket lines if there's a big pay dispute. So I think the idea of union leadership has always been a struggle for me, personally a struggle for me, because I have not seen many trade union leaders on leading us in the way that I'd like to be led, which is, paying conditions are poor, let's do something about it and let it not take a year. So I think these grassroots activists are becoming the leaders of tomorrow. And I think we have to see that social media is doing that job. Are we going to listen to Len McCluskey? Are we going to listen to Christina? When we've got someone who's 21, who's leading a fight that they've never done before, they've never ever set up picket lines and they've never set up demonstrations. And look at last summer, they all did it without any union intervention. And that's just incredible. And we need to unionize those, teach them, let them lead us, in fact, in many ways. Let us stand next to them and let them run ahead and drag us. Because sometimes the so-called leaders that are full-time and paid do need to listen to the grassroots. And I'd say that to the general secretaries of all the unions.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered the NHS pay rise 15 on Socialist Telly. I spoke to a fantastic nursing pay activist called Siobhan Aston about a month ago now. Time's flown. But she was absolutely fantastic and a great advocate for the fight for fair pay amongst nursing staff. It's absolutely brilliant to see. But I agree that the trade unions need to harness this and this activism, these people who are inspired to fight for a fair deal. And obviously through the trade union movement, they can fight for that and do that. But of course, there's many unions, and I always think, well, surely the unions should work together a lot better. It shouldn't, as you said, I think earlier on in this program, it shouldn't matter which union you belong to, as long as you belong to one. But there should be better liaison and better working relations between them. And I think a lot of the time there is genuine friction because they're different general secretaries of different trade unions have very different beliefs in the way that their union should be run. And not always in the most democratic manner. So it's, you say people join a trade union. People go, which one? How do you pick a good one? How do you convince them your union's the best one?
Well, can I come back in? Sorry, I'm talking too much. But whenever I'm dealing with health workers, I say your union is us. It's not the full-time organisers. It's not those in the headquarters doing what they do in an office. It's who's standing with you on the shop floor. Is who are your activists, who are your shop stewards. They are your union. So if ever you're picking a union, if anyone's watching this, you have to look around you and see which are the activists around you. Could you make a union around you? You know, it's easy. It's as easy as that, really. We should be telling our full-time officers what to do. We should be telling those that sit in the headquarters what we are going to do in a democratic process, of course. And part of that is the NEC is a massive part of that, you know, so that the voice that's from the shop floor is in those bodies. Sorry, thank you.
No problem. Was a question in the comment about the how people vote, etc. So we'll quickly touch on that question, which was on my list, and then we'll come back to this discussion. So, in terms of the election at the moment, you know, what stage of the election are we currently at, and what should members be looking out for? When can they expect the ballots, etc., to make sure that they get their votes in and so on?
Right, the election runs over a period roughly 5.5 months. It started in January, and we've reached the stage now where the branches, and there are 800 and odd branches at the union, have had the opportunity to nominate for the 68 seats on the National Executive Council. That are split into 3 groups, really. One is the work areas like health or local government. One group is the geographical regions, and one is the national seats, disabled members, young members, black members. So they've had the chance to nominate. Everybody, you need to get 2 nominations to get on the ballot paper. And that process, on the 14th of April, we'll know who the candidates officially are. Now, among us, we've a rough idea, because we get like a first photograph of what it looks like. So if you take me, for example, I got 79 nominations in the local government section, which is the highest number of nominations anybody has ever got in any work area election in Unison in its whole history. And various other people on this call got similar sort of results in the areas. Existing NEC members have really increased the nominations. And on the 14th of April will be announced who the candidates are for the 68 seats. And then between the 4th of May and the 27th of May will be the elections. It's a postal ballot. You can only vote by post. Every member needs to make sure with their branch that they've got the postal addresses up to date with the records. You can check it yourself on the membership record system. We've got a slate of people standing 56 of, and you can find them at Paul for NEC on Facebook. And all them 56 are on the ballot paper. They're all there now. And that period between 4th and 27th of May will be the vital period for people to vote, to decide what sort of union they want. And what's been so interesting, well, when I first stood for the NEC 15 years ago, you could write your manifesto, because the manifestos have had to be in 2 or 3 weeks ago. You could write your manifesto and know that it'd be up to date when the elections took place 2 months ago. All of us know that anything can happen any day now, and that when the election starts on the 4th of May, but a lot of the issues might be different as to what they were on the 4th of March. But the beauty of what Libby and what Lily was saying earlier is social media, because we can now not sit here and wait for the manifesto to come out and think, God, I wish I'd have known about that. But we can use social media to say what we think about fire and rehire at Dewey. We can say what we think about the 4% offer in Scotland for the NHS and the 0% offer, the 1% offer in England. And so that's the use of social media for us, that is taking us forward. And for me, Libby's made a really, really good point, is the members want to know who you are. They want to see you there. They're not interested in suits. They're not interested in what some colour magazine that people are derogatory about. What they're interested in is, I work on a ward at night, or I work in a care home at night. Who can I contact? Who do I know that can represent me? Now, what we're keen on is not just changing the union, but we're keen on getting other people active. People that vote for us should join us. That's what we want to see. And I'll finish on this point. What's marvellous about this election is the number of candidates, and there's 3 on this call, who wouldn't have seen themselves as NEC candidates 6 months ago. They wouldn't have seen that as part of their, but they were inspired by the General Secretary campaign and the fact that you can change things. And we touched a nerve there. And I think that's what these elections are about.
Very good.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely. I think last year, you know, during the General Secretary election and Paul's candidacy, you know, we saw, you know, the group of like-minded people coming together, but actually talking to each other. And, you know, there wasn't a lot of that last year, to be honest, because, you know, everyone was rushed off their feet. Some of the regional meetings weren't happening throughout the year, but actually there was a whole group of people that got together and started talking actually about the issues rather than just the day-to-day minutiae that we've all got to deal with. And it was really energizing. And I think that's the kind of grassroots campaigning that we want to take forward. You know, we want to bring people up from our branches and bring them on, you know, into our footsteps. It's not just, you know, leadership from the top. It is a lay-led union. So we want to bring people from the grassroots and work with them.
Great. So what, 4th of May, people should worry if they haven't received their ballots by then and start chasing up, or is there a period that they've got to leave it before they can start pursuing? Paul's just looking up.
It probably won't come out right on the 4th, that's for sure.
There's a period, there's a date, and I think it's the 14th of May, but I can't remember, when you can ring the union's customer services centre if you haven't got a ballot paper.
Mm-hmm.
But by that sort of date, you should have got one. But every single member who's been a member for 3 months when the election started, I think it's a date in October last year, every single Unison member will be able to vote in at least one election, and probably double figures for the, depending on what age they are, what group, what area they work in.
Okay, no. Now, back onto the topic we were on before we touched on that, just to resolve that question for the person who asked it. But yeah, I mean, this comment here from John Burgess is typical of quite a few we're getting in. Oh, excuse me, wrong one. We'll come back to that one. We want an organising, fighting trade union. So there's quite a lot. I think it was Mr. McPartland. I think he commented in as well, and he's one of your fellow candidates, if I remember rightly, about, you know, turning Unison into a fighting union. Has it not been so far? I mean, what's the, you know, I've heard as a non-member, you know, that people accuse Unison of being, you know, not fighting enough, not bullshit enough in terms of fighting its disputes, etc. You know, and I don't know whether that's fair from, you know, from the view of people who are inside the union. So, has the union been too soft in that sense in its fights, and has it, you know, can left members on an NEC change that?
I don't think there's a shortage of action and fighting. On any week of the year, there'll be a campaign on. We just don't always hear about it. I mean, some of the campaigns of recent times, whether that's been health workers or care workers all over the place, teaching assistants, local authority workers, individual universities having industrial action, and it's not that those things aren't happening, but quite often we don't see it all joined together. And that's the point I was making earlier about fire and rehire, that we see it as a pattern, and we can join the dots. And that's part of what this campaign is about doing. We want to be able to join up those things where we think there's common cause, and hear that coming from the union nationally, and have that amplified to the extent that you would expect in Britain's biggest union. So, you know, that's what we want. So it's a different way of approaching it. And I'm not going to criticise members and branches from their current positions, because they're all doing the best that they can. I think it's sometimes something about the leadership, that's at regional or national level, trying to link these things together, because actually that makes us stronger, and that's what we need. And that's how we win things, by showing our strengths.
Yeah. Can I come in as well? I was just, as someone who hasn't stopped fighting, I find it quite amusing when someone says Unison are not a fighting union when I haven't stopped for 37 years and I've been on strike many times. But I do think there's been a move, and certainly I'm in Wales, and we have partnership deals, obviously, with government and managers and all the rest of it, that I feel I don't like partnership working. I'll say that now, and I'm sure that's no surprise to the managers that I deal with. I don't like partnership working because I think it works in the favour of management more than it does in the trade union favour. So I do think we need to challenge partnership at times. And I do think when you get to a point where you have collective grievances that are stopped and that could progress, that you do need to have really strong activists, a really strong union branch that will drive that forward. Even if you've got full-time officers that are hoping to, let's abide by partnership. But so I do think the way we get to having a far more visual fighting union is to get those activists, those grassroots people that are not in unions, but to join them, to get them active, to teach and show and not be scared, to be confident. Because I thought we'd be more confident than we are now after having come through the pandemic. And I've been shocked because those managers that have mostly been sitting at home were fast off their feet, weren't they? Getting us all to move and choose and do their bidding. So I do think there's room now for us to rise up again. Don't want to be too poetical about it, but it does feel like we do need to climb back up after the kicking that the public sector's had through the pandemic, delivering services and making sure the communities stayed safe. We blinked through that, and then suddenly we're being assaulted by low pay and conditions. And so I think the fair point is that we do need to strengthen our branches, and we do that by making sure those activists have got the confidence to be able to use that knowledge and skills.
This partnership working idea seems to be a one-sided thing, practically speaking.
Well, let's talk about partnership working. I learned this early doors, from people in the coal board when I first left school. Sometimes in a partnership, you need to work out who's the jockey and who's the horse. And in nearly every partnership working I've seen, I know who the jockey is. And what the real problem is Napoleon said that leaders have to be dealers in hope, and that's what our members want, is some hope. Kath's right, there's disputes all over, but what we need is a unified dispute about outsourcing, about arm's length companies. The government have had a unified approach to the pay freeze. Most people watching this program won't know it, but the vast majority of local government, higher education, probation, and transport staff are in the same pension scheme, going back to local authorities, the vast majority. And so they're using a unified approach to attack us. And what won't work is what somebody describes in America as business unionism, where a union describes its success at the end of the year by how much money it's got in the bank. That's no success at all. The measure of the union is how much money have the members got in the bank. That is the key resource that the union members want. And so for me, when we go forward, I have been a branch, I say this and some people say, you can't say it, Paul. Well, I'm going to say it. I've been a branch secretary of a huge branch for 31 years, nearly 10,000 members. And in 30 years, we've had one compulsory redundancy in the council through all the havoc of the last 30 years. And I've done 200 gross misconduct disciplinaries and never had a dismissal. Now, that's what the members want to hear. They don't want to hear we had a nice meeting with management, we had nice sandwiches and a cup of coffee, and what a pleasant bunch they all are, and they feel really sorry for us. They don't want to know, because fine words don't butter parsnips. They want to know what pay and conditions they're on. And that's what we're about, innit? We're about tapping into, if you talk to young people, I'll let Lily answer this, not me. If you talk to young people, they're not anti-union. They're desperate to be on good terms and conditions and pensions and pay. They want to know who's going to deliver it for them.
Absolutely.
Well, we've come off the back of decades of anti-union legislation to weaken people's understanding of what a union can do for them, I guess. So that's an education job that's there to do. Let's Let's move on, seeing as you got name checked there, Lily. You are standing for election as a young members representative on the NEC. What can young members expect from Unison, and what can they expect from the NEC if we manage to get a left majority on it?
I mean, I think a lot of the things that I was going to touch on have kind of already been said already, so I'll repeat them for the sake of it. But what Libby was saying is really important, like the fact that they're particularly with young people, and I think I may have said this a couple of times, but yeah, like I say, I'll say it again. It's not that young people aren't interested in politics. It's not that there's activists out there. It's not that people have become apathetic about politics or things that are going on in their workplace. The thing with Unison, particularly with young members, is and many unions, is actually these young people are a hell of a lot more radical than the actual unions. School children going out and organising climate strikes because they care about the future of the planet, and they can see that we're not on the right track, and they can see that we need radical change. Just the same with the A-levels fiascos, with the BLM movements. It's just and the Kill the Bill protests that have been going on over the past couple of weeks. It's not that young people aren't interested in politics. It's that there's not an outlet for them. Like, there's 63,000 young people in Unison out of what, 1.4 million, 1.3 million. It's not good enough. And to talk about pensions as well, we've mentioned pensions a couple of times. Like, the way that you get young people involved is to actually change their living and their working conditions. Because pensions aren't at the top of my priority list right now. But the reason why that is, and I know a lot of my friends, a lot of my co-workers, I've been working since I was 17, and worked alongside a lot of young people, a lot of people of all ages, and a lot of young people don't take pensions because they can't afford to have that taken out of their paycheck. It's not that they aren't thinking about their future. It's not that they're not worried about their future and they're terrified about their future because they can see crisis after crisis coming and no solution. It's the fact that if they get 50 quid taken out of their paycheck every month, they can't pay their bills. They can't pay their electricity. They might not be able to afford food for a week. What if something goes wrong? It's just simply not doable. So I think, tackle these sorts of issues, these like pensions and that sort of thing, it needs to really have more of a concrete base, particularly around like pay banding and the different ages for the national minimum wage. I mean, when I started working when I was 17, I got £3.79 an hour, £3.89 an hour. I was working 2 jobs alongside my college, and one was £4 and one was £3.89 an hour. And you think now what the national minimum wage has gone up to this just in April, what, £4.30 for 16 to 17-year-olds? It's just an example of one of many, I think, divide and conquer tactics, because it's not like these young workers are doing anything less. It's not like they deserve less money. They're working as hard as everyone else. And actually, they deserve that pay. And I was kind of talking before, like, be it working in hospitality and working in retail is kind of how so many different young people get in the workplace. And for me, I started working in the NHS last year. Annual leave, the idea of pension, sick pay was really novel to me when I started working, because I'm not used to those sorts of rights. I wasn't used to those sorts of benefits in a job. If I couldn't work, then I just didn't get paid. If I'm sick, then usually you just have to come in, and then it ends up spreading through the workforce. And, we can see how that's gone with COVID, that sort of thing. But, there's so many different things that Unison can do for young people. And I think Libby said it really well when she said that, like, it needs to catch up. We need to catch up to these young people. And I think the way we do that isn't offering free discos at conference, as I've been told, and free pens and free calendars. And exactly. It's about changing people's lives and making them feel safe in the future, and being able to see that they will have a fairer future in front of them. I think that's how we get people involved in unions and show that we are just as militant, just as ready to fight for our future as as young people have done time and time again.
I think if you offer, I mean, it's a long time since I could qualify as a young person, but if you offer young people hope that things can get better, then you'll see a massive response, as we saw, with the hope that Jeremy Corbyn offered when he was the leader of the Labour Party. Massive, although he was well into his 60s when he became leader, the massive response from young people at all kinds of events and venues for the hope that he offered. Very specific question in here from John, who's down in Barnet. Can I ask NEC candidates if they will publicly support the #WeAreBarnet campaign? Is that something you guys are you're behind?
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go, John.
That campaign is what we've just talked about, isn't it? About fire and rehire. That's a group of workers, and the word group's not big enough to describe the 1,000 roughly people there who were council employees, got put in various private companies. Most of them have come back, but not back to the terms and conditions of pay that they were on when they left. And that's what I'll tell you a funny story. I might laugh this. I spoke to a building worker the other day who were active in the 72 building workers strike. He's 85 now. And he says, Paul, in 1963, I had 2 young children and a wife, and I wanted to buy a motorbike sidecar. And I wanted to do just what Lily said. I didn't want to pay the pension because I wanted a motorbike sidecar. And the council said, well, you can't opt out. There's no facility to opt out. And he said, I sat down and I rang 35 public sector employers and private sector employers in Wakefield because I were looking for an employer that didn't have a pension scheme, and I couldn't find one. I was furious that I couldn't find one. Now, any young worker can find one now, can't they? They can go and work for the Barnet Care situation. That's why we support it, because that's the future for all workers, unless we get organised.
Yeah, and it is happening up and down throughout other councils. But it's good that Barnet are leading the way with that campaign. So, yeah, fully support that.
John, you got your answer. If you're still watching, then drop me a line and we'll see about getting you and others on to talk about that campaign specifically so people get aware as well. Next question. Where are we? So we've touched on it already, but what should Unison be doing about pay in the public sector? I mean, the government's offers for the so-called frontline heroes, as they like to term them, have been derisory, to be honest. And we've seen exactly how much they value it. You can't bank a clap, and and yet pretty much that and a badge is a lot of is what people in the NHS are getting, and people in other public services have been right on the front line there as well. So what can Unison do, and how can the Unison NEC members help if we get a left majority on the committee?
Can I jump in on this? It's been the most exciting month at work, that's for sure. The place is lit up with people wanting to strike. And these are people that, I said it before, not in a union. So there's a lot of recruiting to whatever union they want to get into, who actually want to have a strike now, today. They don't understand what we're waiting for. They don't understand that we're waiting for a pay review body. So there's a lot of talking going on, a lot of, on the shop floor, walking around, discussions, and all day long, all night long. We're actually doing night visits as well now. So it's quite humbling, really, to see that kind of passion for what people want to do. How to go on strike is one of the biggest ones. We're actually putting through a pamphlet at the moment on how to strike, because so many people haven't. It's been so long, certainly in Wales, that people have been on strike. And usually it's only been Unison and Unite now, and G&B. Now it's going to be the RCN. So we're actually going to have a proper health strike where we're going to have emergency cover. So if it happens, if it comes to that, if this government doesn't give us what we want, so it could be in the summer we'll be looking at one of the biggest national strikes this country's seen for a long, long time. So, and a lot of people, it's going to be a lot of colour on those picket lines, and a lot of politics will be spoken. So it's exciting. We're waiting to see what Wales comes back at. We know that Scotland had 4% and that England have had 1%. I suspect we'll get 4 or 4.5% coming in from Wales. and we've had the RCN turning that down in Scotland. So we are in interesting times, but people are up for the fight, and that's what's been really amazing. You know, I'm an old union hack, you could say, but again, I'll come back to young people. It's them. I had something like 10 nursing students chatting to me about how they could go on strike because they're nursing students. You know, most of them are healthcare workers as well because they're doing their bit as support workers. So it's making sure that they're in unions, you know. So it is exciting times. I can't bring anything bad into this conversation other than there's some remarkable people out there that have nothing. Some people that are, you know, domestics that are on the poorest pay, laundry workers that are on poor pay, and they still want to strike. So it's really making sure we've got our fighting funds in action, that we can support that, and that everyone's got the right addresses in the system so they get a chance to vote.
We've touched on the issue of pensions a couple of times through the discussion, but question here: how can Unison best defend public sector pensions, and is it doing a good job of it at the moment? And there have been a lot of attempts recently to weaken local government pensions through a cap, and smaller employers are pulling out of defined benefit pensions, as Paul touched on. Who wants to jump in on that? I mean, you know, what sort of job is the union doing at the moment, and how can it do it best?
I think we had a reprieve on pensions in local government. We were very lucky, actually. So the government wanted to bring in a cap for which would apply to staff who were made redundant over 55. And obviously there's a lot of people in that category in local government could take their pension early, but the government wanted to restrict how much they would pay if the cost of that was over 95,000. And that sounds a lot, but if you retire early, there's a pension strain that the employer has to pay, and the government wanted to include that in the cap. So that would have meant that lots of our kind of middling and to average paid staff who had lots of service would be hit by this cap. And for us, we had a restructure last year, and we had some revenues and benefit staff. Their jobs were going because the jobs were going to the DWP for processing, and that was on the cards for a long time. People knew that, but lots of them were actually looking forward to being able to take an early pension. But they were due under the government's proposals to lose a lot of money, like thousands of pounds of money, which would be absolutely disastrous. So the unions put together judicial reviews, which were due to be launched, and the government has pulled the proposals, but they're not going to go away. We know they're going to come back with something that's tweaked. So it's a really, you know, a desperate situation, you know, if you're faced with losing thousands of pounds of your earned income. But actually this time we didn't meet the proposals with anything like the campaigning or the strikes or the industrial action that we've met previous pension cuts. I think in 2008 and 2013, I might have got those dates wrong, but we took action across all the unions, unified action to fight off the pension attacks. We didn't do that this time. You know, we had other campaigning, we had writing to MPs and all that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, this is one of the examples where the government is kind of making us pay for the crisis that it's going to face. So I think we really do need to kind of start campaigning again desperately on pensions, and to get to where we have been before with unified action.
Anybody else want to comment?
Really clear.
Absolutely right.
that's a bit of a technical explanation for anyone who's not into local government pensions. Lots of people won't be, but that's basically, we're potentially going to lose thousands of pounds if you've got lots of service. So we need to be, really on our ball about that.
Let's be really clear what the government are proposing. What the government are saying to people, the people that Liz is talking about, who might have 30 to 35 years service, what they're saying to them is, we might want to get rid of you. You don't want to go. We might want to get rid of you. We might want to sack you. And if we do sack you in the past and you were over 55, if we sack you involuntary, you would have got a pension and a lump sum and a redundancy payment, a statutory redundancy payment. What the proposal said, and they're shocking, what the proposal said is either A, you'll get a smaller pension, B, you'll have to wait years to receive it, or C, you'll get made redundant and you won't get statutory redundancy. No inflated statutory redundancy, just a statutory redundancy. And so it links us back to the beginning of the programme without any script. The fire and rehire. It's all the same. Even under Cameron, the pension proposals were going forward. These pension proposals are about going backwards. They're about reducing what you've already paid for. And that's what it's about cutting terms and conditions. At the end of the day, it's a faster method of cutting their costs. Fire and rehire, you could achieve it in 40 years, couldn't you, if you just did it through recruitment? That's what they've done to young people. They've had lower conditions for them. And they're saying, well, this crisis is going to be too much for that. We're going to have fire and rehire. And the unions are going to earn the spurs over the next period. And it's not, the members don't deserve a trial period to see who's good and who isn't good. Those who want to lead the members in the forthcoming period have to say what they're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen to the members. That's what the members are interested in, aren't they? They aren't interested in the personalities. They're interested in what policies are being put forward by the unions. And it's really interesting what Libby said. I like listening to Libby. It's really interesting what Libby said about the atmosphere in the hospitals. Because I remember the atmosphere in Wakefield on the night the miners' strike started. And older people will understand this. It was Tuesday night, but it was like Friday night. The pubs were packed. The atmosphere were 50% of miners were under 26. It was a right atmosphere because people knew what were coming. And in some respects, our members have like a dichotomy in their heads at this moment in time. On the one hand, they don't want to face what's coming. They don't want to think about it. But on the other hand, they want to be led by somebody who is thinking about it because they're thinking about nothing else. When you go to a food bank, you think, the only Charles Dickens, the only person who thinks more about money than rich people is people that haven't got any money. And if you're queuing up at a food bank now, you want to know what the overtime rate is or what the minimum wage is. When I started in the council, you could get in the council 100% mortgage at 1% below the commercial rate. You put that forward now, that would be seen as an unreasonable demand, wouldn't it? But if we put that forward to young members, God, they would think that were good, wouldn't they? 100% mortgage at 1% below the commercial rate. And when's the last time anybody's seen a claim that actually was an improvement? The dented shield's so dented it's inside out. And that's what the elections are about. What would be positive?
I'll just point out there for anybody who wants to see the full left slate for the elections, there's a link there, bit.ly/Unison left slate, and that'll get you to a tweet which has a graphic showing all of the people in the slate there. Right, we've run a little bit over time, but I don't want to cut us off too quickly because we've got one question I think is important to still cover, at least one, which is how do Unison members get involved in the campaign to help get left candidates onto the NEC?
Well, in terms of social media, the main sort of hub of everything is at Paul for NEC. It's on Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Instagram as well. And that's where the majority of candidates' material is being shared. You can get in contact with us on the email as well. paulfornec@gmail.com is the best way to contact us, and we can put you in contact with any member of the collection of us here and more of us. So that's probably the best way, I would say.
Very good. And there's one quite specific question that's come up. We'll just cover that before we finish, if anybody's got anything to say on it, which is from Katie McDonough. What's the panel's view on the practice of some public sector workers taking redundancy and then getting re-employed on lower pay? Meaning whoever comes after them ends up with lower pay when they go.
Well, it's a two-edged sword, that, isn't it? You know, people should be replaced by people on the same pay and conditions as them. But what people are doing it for is because when I started work, when people retired, it meant they retired. It doesn't mean that to a lot of workers now. What it means now is I've got a pot of money there to add to a pathetic state pension that if I get a part-time job, I might be able to add it all together. It's a bit like if you went into any school in Britain, there'll be people there with 2 or 3 or 4 jobs trying to make 25, 30 hours up. There's a school cleaner, school crossing patrol, a teaching assistant, a lunchtime supervisor, etc. And whereas you shouldn't replace people on lower terms and conditions, people are scraping about trying to find money, aren't they? That's what they're trying to do. You know, why? You know, in a proper world, if you were offered pay that were less than the job used to be, you wouldn't take that job up. But you can't make that alternative when you're struggling to eat. And that, I think that some of these people who talk about, this personality in the Labour movement or that personality in the Labour movement, who's getting this and who's getting that, some of our members can't eat. Some of our members can't feed the children. I speak to adults who are going without meals to feed the children, that are queuing up at food banks. And that's what us 5 on this conversation are all about, aren't they? We're about dignity. We're about the right to work. God, nobody wants to go to work. Ain't what you want to do with your life, is it? But if you do go to work, you want to be paid adequately so you can live a life. And we aren't living lives at the moment. We're just wondering if we can keep body and soul together till next year's crap pay offer. And that's what people in the health service know about. They're getting 10, 15% less money than they were getting 10 years ago. Their kids are getting less holidays, etc., etc. And my last quote for tonight, there's a lot of us in the gutter and we want to be looking at the stars. That's what it's about.
Very, very practical question. And just to finish off, and this is my question, for the sake of people who might not be aware, I mean, how much practical power does the national executive within Unison have to set the direction and the actions followed by the General Secretary, for example?
Well, Paul talked about this at the start of the meeting, and it's the day-to-day running of the union. It's the lay-led executive. So really it applies to every single decision that the union's making. So anything that you want to raise, any issue in any sector, in different different political questions, the NEC has the power to change that, and that's why we're in it, because we want to change the union.
I think we'll end on that note. If that's somebody one more.
I was just going to say, I could just put in a tiny little bit more admin stuff for actual voting. So when the voting comes out, you will get it is quite confusing, and this is why I want to just clarify it before we finish. You will get the ability to vote for like 12 to 15, maybe 17 different people. You'll have your service group, you'll have your region, and then there are national seats as well. And there may even be more. Correct me if I'm wrong. Go on, Kath.
There's those 3 areas. That's what you want to be looking out for.
Yeah, absolutely. Turnout for the NEC is 5%, compared to, as far as I'm aware, is compared to the General Secretary election, which was 10%. Correct me if I'm wrong. So it's really, really, really important for us to get as many votes out as we can. Make sure that you understand everyone that you can vote for. The national seats that you can vote for are LGBT, Black members, disabled members, and if you're under 27, young members candidate. The young members has 1.8% turnout, 1.9% turnout, and it's usually at the back of the like election booklet. So if you are a young member, please make sure that you do use your vote. Any Unison member, please make sure that you use your vote, because we can't do anything if we don't get involved, and we don't have that backing behind us. And we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak their mind, have their voice heard, listened to by the NEC. And that's the end of admin.
Okie dokie. Well, we'll end on that note, but I think that, we'll hark back to that one, that the National Executive of the Union has a good deal of influence on the behaviour of the Union internally and externally, then by the sounds of it. If that's not a good enough reason to get involved and make sure your vote is counted, I don't know what is. So make sure that you get your ballot in, and if you don't receive it within the time window that Paul was talking about, then make sure you chase up and insist on having your democratic say in the outcome. I thank everybody who's joined us on the panel tonight. Really appreciate everybody's time and input, and thank you to everybody who's watched us through the program. Just finish off with the last word and say, do share Socialist Telly content, and make sure that people see what's happening. It's a good opportunity to get informed. Do also make sure that you search us out on the various social media platforms, and make sure that you hit whatever that platform's version is of the subscribe button and the notification icon, so you get informed of everything that's coming out. And watch Socialist Telly throughout the rest of the week, and join us again on Skwawk Talk in a week's time. Thank you ever so much, and have a good rest of the week. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.